Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Lafayette Connector Section 106 consultation meetings. My name is Derek. A number of us have worked together on this project for some time. I'm going to turn my camera off so we can focus on the slides, but good evening, everybody. So tonight's a big night. We've spent a lot of time talking about the historic properties in the community. And now we get to start talking about the effects to those properties tonight. So we've got a great deal of information to share with y'all. Lots of maps and figures, some 3D renderings that give you some sense of what it will be like, even though it's not entirely fleshed out with all the changes. That's the big one, the elevated structure. So, but we also want it to be conversational. This is the beginning of a conversation where we're going to give you a lot of data, but please ask questions. If you do have questions as we're proceeding, put them in the chat, and Jennifer will let me know. And in some cases, we'll stop and unmute you and unpack it and talk more about the graphic. In some cases, I'll just keep it until the end. If you have any tech issues, if you can't hear quite right, or if something seems to be going awry for you, Jennifer is also going to put her phone number in the chat. If you text her, she can help solve your problems. She's part of a crew of folks here to solve your problems. So I'm not going to go through, and we're not going to necessarily introduce each other. This 106 group has been together before. In the room, we have a few individuals. I'll just name a few of them. Jennifer, staying on top of all the facilitation and technical stuff for us. Lou Costa, who's he's with me, he's the contractor side lead for Section 106 issues. And then representing the DOTD, we have Carrie Cox and Noel Ardwin, who know all about 106, have done it for lots of projects, know all about state law, and they're here to back us up and provide clarity. And then those of you online, that includes neighborhood representatives. We also have local government representatives and representatives of the Federal Highway Administration on the line tonight. So let's begin. We're going to just quickly talk about the goals that we have for tonight, talk about the modified alternatives. Now, a number of you that are participating have seen detailed drawings already. For others, it may be new to you. If it is new to you, there's a lot of opportunities next week in addition to get more information. We're going to have a series of neighborhood meetings for neighborhoods joining the corridor. We're also going to have a public meeting on the 4th in the Science Museum on Jefferson. And so there you can see things in great detail, videos of the traffic simulations and line work of the roadway and lots of urban design things as well. So please come on out and see what we have there. What we're really getting into tonight are the potential effects to the resources. Key among those, Sterling Grove, the downtown Lafayette historic area, Freetown, Puerto Rico district, Trapeze plant site, and the Wallace estate. And there'll be some time for discussion. And that discussion will continue to the next session as well as we come to agreement on these effects. All right, so the goals, as you will recall, is essentially the federal government, if it's taking an action, is to take into account the potentially adverse effects to historic properties, making sure they know what the historic properties are. Making a reasonable opportunity for y'all to be involved in the process is also key. So we have lots of ways for y'all to get involved. Participating and giving up your evening is fabulous. Thank you for that. You can contact us through various means and give us comments on these. We hope to actually have those tonight in the next session, so it's very conversational in nature. So there are 3 big steps to all of this. You have to determine which properties are historic. And you'll remember that we went through a few rounds of that. We had a historic preservation specialist go out, take a lot of photographs and take a lot of notes and work with the State Historic Preservation Office, who was key in this whole process, to come to agreement on what is historic. Then we brought it back to y'all, and a number of you said, well, take another look. take a look at a couple of these blocks, take a look at this building, that building. And so we went back and we reassessed a few things. Y'all had also said, do a double check on the properties that were part of the original advanced acquisition program, because the properties in the advanced acquisition program could have moved into a historic status. They could have aged enough, or there could have been restoration work or something of that sort, but we looked at those and got all that clear. So that big first step is done. All the data is in. The next step is to assess the effects. That's what the graphics are here to help us do tonight. We've got our perception of what the effects are or are not in this case. We'd like to hear from y'all. And then the next thing we do, if we have to do it at all, is seek ways to avoid, minimize, and mitigate any effects that there are. Lots of ways to do that. That's a fun part of the conversation if we end up going there. So what has been done already? Well, the record of decision in 2003 was the approval of the design that was developed in the late 1990s. And it had effects on what is now the Freetown Puerto Rico district, the downtown area, and the trap base site. There were a number of different connections, east-west connections that extended out, interchanges, had a larger footprint. And so for many reasons, to preserve the urban area, to reduce displacements and to avoid historic impacts, we've really tucked that footprint in a number of places. And essentially we have pulled it away from all of the properties that we could. There was also a visual effect. So you remember probably many, many years ago, lots of conversation about the Sterling Grove Historic District and potential impacts to it and St. Genevieve Church. There was talk about mitigating that with a plaza and some other improvements, because the thruway was going to be sort of right at the front door there. Well, we have moved it over 100 feet further away, and we have simulations of what that's going to look like from St. Genevieve to share with you tonight. So we're very excited about the extent to which we've been able to avoid effects already. Now, the effects obviously are most easily characterized by a displacement. If the highway has to cause a property to be acquired and the building to be removed, then that's a pretty clear direct effect. But it gets a little bit more complicated than that. As you all know, there's visual, atmospheric, noise effects. If those effects are happening to a historic property, those become part of this historic property conversation. So we want to talk about that a bit tonight. As it did before, the process concludes oftentimes with a memorandum of agreement, which is essentially just a document that puts in place everything we talk about through this process and what we come to agreement on in the end. And so, for example, when the expressway was going to be built right on the front door of St. Genevieve was getting certain improvements, and there was some noise mitigation there, like I said, some sort of plaza to try and buffer things a bit. And that was all captured in an MOA. And all of y'all, either as a representative of some level of government or a representative of neighborhood or a citizen, have a chance to comment on that MOA. So the process is ongoing. We want to hear your input, and then that final decision, we really want to make sure that's capturing a collective understanding and agreement on how to proceed. So let's get into the good information here, the new stuff. So here's a quick look at the entire corridor. And in the central core, which where we've got a lot of our conversation, you can see the outlines of certain districts. We will talk about those districts. And then you see the outline of the Wallace Estate and Trapeze, which are very close to the corridor as well. And we've got some zoomed in examples to show you of what the effect is. So this is a very, very slightly different alternative that has very little change in terms of the potential effects to a historic property. The traffic would operate differently though. Essentially, one of the alternatives is built with roundabouts and the other is built with traffic control devices. If you come to the open house next week, we've got all sorts of great traffic videos for you and lots of information about the differences between those two. The differences between those two for historic properties is pretty minimal, as you'll see. All right. I hope you're ready. I hope we've got someone here from Sterling Grove tonight. I don't know if we do or not, but we're excited to show how things have changed a bit here. So the graphic here is the line types are going to be the same for all of these maps. And you can see a legend down below. So what I'll first point out to you are the Sterling Grove Historic District lines. So it's this sort of peach color that's running here between Elizabeth and the northbound thruway, right? Now, when our historic surveyors went out, they said, well, actually, the district could be a bit larger. And they said that there's some additional properties that are historically eligible that could be part of a revised or amended historic district. And you see some of those are right up there on the Evangeline Thruway, and there's a little bit more up to the north. So those are potentially eligible, which means that they are subject to federal protections and part of this process. The district has not been formally updated, but in a sense, we're not going to run roughshod or over a property, whether it's listed or not, if it's eligible. So we're considering those to be sort of all-inclusive, and that district would include the purple in terms of our need to avoid and minimize the impacts. Next, I'll point out the red outline, which is the old design, the one that y'all and we all collectively agreed in 2018 that we would throw out and do something different. And you can see that it encroached in a number of places, and you can see it coming all the way down Simcoe, being right in front of St. Genevieve, which is that little cruciform, gabled roof structure right there in the corner of the district. So it warranted a good bit of mitigation because it was intruding, and it was going to be visually and audibly altering the district, right? Well, it has been pushed a great deal further away. There are still some local improvements. So parts of Simcoe would be improved in ways that y'all would like. The road will get better, with better sidewalks, that sort of thing, and the short segments we have to touch. But the main point here is that the primary alignment of the highway is no longer right there in front of the church. It's been pushed half a block away, let's say, over 100 feet away. And there's some intervening buildings, trees. There could be intervening buildings in the future. So that was one of the reasons. If you look at the design, there's other questions you might have about why is the ramp right here? Why is there a roundabout right here? Why was it brought down? A lot of the reasoning was partly pulling it further away from the Sterling Grove Historic District. So we're very excited about that change. I don't know if it'll be immediately, but we will have these online available for you later in some download. So you can talk to your neighbors and think about this a little bit more. This is not the only night we're going to cover these. We're almost going to have the same conversation again the next time, but hopefully hear more about what y'all's thinking is about these effects. So the signal alternative is one of the only places that they're a little bit different. And it's really just a difference in the local street configuration. So the main line, which is the big yellow bordered corridor coming north and south, right? The main line stays put. It's not really changing. Whoop, gave away something there. But you can see that the way that Simcoe is connected with second, third has some slight changes. Down there at the bottom. But like I said, those are not areas where we're going to build an elevated expressway. Those are just local street improvements on the ground. If they were undertaken by local government, it might not even be subject to a 106 process. It's really just a short street improvement where it will connect with the rest of the network that we'll be constructing with this project. So that's super good news. And a bunch of y'all were part of the advisory group. And in the advisory group, we have started to make some preliminary decisions about the structure. These are just preliminary in terms of giving us enough of a definition of a project so that we could do the environmental analysis. And we also wanted to really forge ahead with some of the context sensitive design features. So there was a lot of input supporting a certain column type and a segmental box structure. The DOTD agreed that even though it's a higher value approach, the segmental box has lots of benefits to it, and to go with that approach for the project preliminarily, that's what we're going to go with. And so that is specifically what you see rendered here in the background. And it is to scale, right? So we had agreed that rather than the 16.5-foot clearance underneath it, we'd go up to 22 feet. That this simulation has it at 22 feet. The deck is about right. The massing is about right. Now, what you don't see here are the local street improvements, right? So if a little bit of Simcoe or Third under there is improved, you might actually see some differences in the way the street is striped. You might actually see light posts that are different. There'd be likely going to be light standards up on the expressway too. We didn't put all those in. It's not really about that. It's about the massing of the structure. That's the primary piece. But if you want to, you can imagine some lighting. You can imagine those things. The local street improvements are more of a factor in some of the other renderings that you'll see later. So this is standing right in front of the church, if I'm correct, right? Right there at the corner, looking across the way. At the front door. Thank you. Thank you. So that's a good bit different than the conversation was 20 years ago. We're very, very happy that that's been further pulled away from the fine historic district that is Sterling Grove. This is another view looking same general location, but different direction. Gives you a different perspective. Very slightly different, but still a little bit more information. And these are rendered models, so it's not easy for us to produce them from different angles and locations. We had to go out of our way to get photos taken, professional photos taken, and you know, do some fancy electronic things. But that being said, we can answer some questions now that it's somewhat modeled from other angles, but these are the ones that that were most key to some of the most important historic resources in town. You can barely see it, but it's off there to the left. This is looking north at Evangeline Thruway at Hopson Street. So you can see it there behind you, behind the trees there on the left. Bit better view there. So like I was saying, the street immediately in front of you would look a lot different. This is not meant to simulate the entire project. That is a very costly endeavor that we try not to do in Louisiana, to do full-blown photorealistic renderings of lots of different places, because that is an expensive thing to do. But I think, so imagine in front of you is going to be very different, but that being said, the structure is not. That is a pretty accurate simulation of what the structure would be like from that location. We also have a map that shows the points of these perspectives, which way they're facing and such. We could put that online after the meeting as well. It might help if a couple of y'all are getting a little bit lost, perhaps. Thanks. And Lou is great. Lou is further informing me that this shows the removal of Hopson Street, which would come with the construction of the project. Feel free to chime in with the other ones. I know you're very studied on this. So let's talk about the downtown Lafayette commercial area. When our historic surveyors went out, they identified the potential for one, as probably others had before. And now there is one. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. Roxana with the local government and others, but I think she's leading the historic preservation work. They've really been hustling. They have a number of new districts. They've got some great documentation. They do some great outreach here with their CLG program, which is the local government version of being able to do historic preservation work, which is sort of an authority that trickles down from the feds. She cannot be here tonight. I don't doubt that she'll be part of the rest of the process. I did want her to just talk a little bit about that downtown commercial area. It is not really a big factor for our project. It doesn't get that close. I'll show you some maps in a moment, but it's interesting. It's, you know, a city doesn't get a new National Register district that often. And I think that she could probably tell some interesting tales about it. I've looked at part of the nomination, but maybe next time she'll share some of that with us. So let's see if I can move. Yes. Okay, good. Robert was just saying that the renderings really helped to be able to see what the effect might be like. Good. That's exactly why the state wanted to do so. So let me, I've got a Zoom screen I have to get out of the way here so I can see everything that y'all are seeing. There we go. All right. Thank you, Robert. So back in the downtown historic commercial area, and the same sort of colors that you saw before on the map. The historic district comes out. It does come past Cypress, is in the original recommendation. There's a couple of mixes here, and Roxanne could talk about what properties on the edge might make it more or less historic and such. But it comes over closer to the project, but you can see it does not actually. It's not impacted by the project. Now that's only because y'all worked so hard to change the design in 2017 and 18, right? So if you see the red, the sort of red curve that's coming into the left, Ms. Carlita, I think, has made some lines on the map. I don't know if those can be removed if I have to do it, but you see what's happening? So the rod alternative extended a good ways in that direction, all the way past Buchanan, as you can see it on the left side of the image here, and was consuming a good chunk of land. And y'all said, no, let's not do that anymore. And so as you can see in the yellow here, the project has also been pulled back on this side, right? So what was going to be the edge of the corridor here, right up behind Rosa Parks, is now pushed a half a block over and well outside of anybody's definition of the edge of this downtown commercial district. Oh, geez. Oh, we didn't have a rendering for this one, did we, Lou? For the downtown. That's right. Okay. Right. Mm-hmm. So we don't have any renderings for this one because it really wasn't too much of an issue. We did take it into account even before it was on the register because of its potential to get on the register. But that being said, it's a good ways away. And you know that, and the core of the downtown is, of course, further from here. It doesn't really start. You could say maybe a block or so right here. But at any rate, we do want to show you now and talk a little bit about the potential impacts to Freetown, Puerto Rico. You're going to help us with our erasing. Okay. All right, so Anita was asking if we're showing only the roundabout because it was the more invasive or more impactful of the two. And no, it's because I fat fingered the buttons while I was getting confused about the annotation on the screen. And so we actually do have both of them to show you here. I just managed to go past one of those pretty quickly. Okay. Well, let me go backwards and show you there. So this one's compared to the signal, and that was the roundabout. Again, a key difference is the extent to which the improvement would be on 2nd Street, perhaps, but still, that's just a street improvement. All right, now on to Freetown, Puerto Rico. Again, with the lines on the map, we're a little bit closer now. So the red had a significant impact on the Freetown district. I'm going to just sort of use Freetown as shorthand. I realize it's a complex district made of different areas and neighborhoods in a sense. But I'm just going to use Freetown just to keep the conversation going. So the red had quite a significant impact. There was part of a ramp and an access that came way across Garfield up Johnson Street. There were going to be acquisitions of historic properties. Obviously, it would have penetrated the perimeter of the district. So that was part of the revision that was done a few years ago. But then with additional work being done by Lou, working with the Roadway team to just really, arrange things and tuck things and size things to pull it out of the district, right? And so you can see that in this area, I will show you down further, the district ends with this sort of peach line right here. And you can see that a local street improvement approaches it, but that the structure as it is not, it's about a block away. One of these blocks here you can see in size. Imagine that. So it's even a little bit larger than that. So pushed it a good deal further away. It was going to be right up here. And that is the modified alternatives, which are the same in that location. So now we're going to show you some renderings. I think I am. There we go. This is one along Gordon Street. You can see it in the background there. You can't see it easily. And if a couple of trees were a little bit taller or in a slightly different place, you wouldn't end up seeing it at all. But we want to provide these as well as pretty pictures of the bridge so that you really can get a kind of a realistic impression of how it will be. And it's a very consistent alignment, and it is an entirely consistent height and clearance. So if you're 2 blocks away wondering what it looks like for you, we should talk about it, but it's probably going to look a lot like this, right? If you're the same distance as this a photo was taken from the structure, it's going to look a lot like that. So look down your road in your neighborhood, think about where it will be and what's between you and it. Are there buildings? Are there trees already in place? Is there nothing yet there? It's a fun exercise to do with your neighbors. Well, maybe not fun, but a good exercise to do with your neighbors. Gets a little bit tighter down here. We have worked and squeezed and pinched, but it's still really tight. There's just not a whole lot that can be done without, because of the alignment of, the existing corridor, which is part of a big federal multi-state endeavor, right? And we are just one little segment in that. We are sort of wedded to this alignment in a way, and to the best of our ability, we pulled it out of the district, but it's still pretty darn close. So if you look at this red line, this is what it used to be. It was wiping out this first row of parcels, many of which are vacant, but still, it is the edge of the district, right? And so it was shaving off the edge of that district. We've pulled it away from that. We pulled it out of all those properties, and it's now right on the edge. Now, granted, there's some parallax going on with aerials and things like that, so it's not always easy to see at this scale, but we have gotten it out of these parcels. That being said, it's still somewhat close in that the environment will be different. Is it an adverse effect? Well, that's not for me to say, but it will be a different environment visually, audibly, etc. And that's what we're here to talk about. It's one of the big topics that we have to talk about here. So let's look at that. What's that going to look like? So this is looking from about 16th Street and Drain. Drain's right there. It's going to be right there next to what will be the frontage road, and then the elevated expressway. So I think what you see here, and Lou, correct me if I'm wrong, he worked a lot on these renderings. So this is Drain Street, right? So that's the far or the eastern side of Drain Street. And here there's like that little triangle of land, a couple of trees there. So this would be one of the frontage roads, so to speak, coming down here off the structure and connecting. You can see that right here in the foreground. Now, there may be wall details, there may be fence details. This is a general massing rendering. This is not a perfect, every little thing in place kind of rendering, but it really gives you a good sense of just how close it would be and what would that be like. And it also helps you understand that while there will be the elevated expressway there's also this local road in between the two, which does sort of, even though the project's right here close to Drain Street, it is because the DOTD, for safety and to be able to maintain structures, has some offsets and some right-of-way needs. So they don't build right up to the edge of their own right of way. And so you can see there is a bit of a buffer in a sense, and then the ramp comes down and then the structure here. We have some other depictions of this type of thing for you. And we assume that we're going to have a lot of conversations about this. Here's another way of looking at it. Sort of an oblique view at 16th and Drain. Yep. Looking south, you can see the structure here. You can see this one a little straddle bent put in. So like I said, there could be intervening treatments. There could be something in the way, fencing, screening, landscaping. We can have those conversations, but this is barring any of that and minus a few details like lighting on the structure potentially. This is what that view would look like. Here's another one looking from Alley Street and Drain Street, looking south. Good bit further away there. Local street environment would be a bit different. We will be adding some different things in different places. Every time the DOTD will touch a short segment of the local road, it will be brought up to standard, and oftentimes sidewalks added and things of that sort. But it's sort of a different conversation. We wanted to focus on this big effect and help you to imagine what that would be like if this is your neighborhood. All right, we can come back to these. Is there anything in the chat, Jennifer? Okay. We'll come back to these and talk later if you wish. Otherwise, I'm going to roll on to the trapeze site. So this was also a super tight squeeze, and we're still working on it to some extent. Obviously, we have the conceptual design complete for the elevated expressway. But that's just one piece in a long design chain of events. And so we're now starting to look more at drainage. There's drainage runs through here in a certain way. Maybe that remains on surface. Maybe we put that underground. That's all part of what would be in the DOTD right of way. Local street improvements, not just the elevated structure, but the local street improvement through here, the frontage road, you might say. Whether it has a sidewalk, whether it has a standard shoulder, whether it would have a bike lane, for example, all have an effect because it is so close right here. So we've pulled it back further than the rod. The rod definitely clipped the corner down here, meaning it was an adverse effect. We were going to have to go through the process. There was going to be mitigation. But we've pulled it out of that area. You can see the lines are close, but our right of way for this project will not cross over into their right of way. So we've managed to avoid that impact. Much like the slides we just saw for Freetown, it would still be a visual change and such. That being said, there's a lot of changes already potentially underway here at the site with a private development party who's looking to convert it to mixed use. And so their designs aren't as advanced, or at least last time I spoke with them, it wasn't. So we don't know where their main focal points would be in here. They'd like to have access from the throughway frontage roads. Maybe there'd be a walkway on this side, something of that sort. So there's details to still be worked out in terms of what that edge would even look like once they redevelop it, and they may be changing some buildings around. Some of these are more historically, I guess, important than others. So we don't know what's happening on this side, but we do know what we're trying to do. And so to date, we've done what we were trying to do, which is to pull it out of that parcel, and our footprint does not cross over their footprint. Great. What's the question?
Robert asks, is there a tree planting buffer program along the right of way? This would significantly help mitigate air, noise, and visual pollution. Trees of Acadiana would be a good partner.
Thank you for that. Landscaping is an option. Trees are an option. Sometimes the trees are planted to actually mitigate an effect, a visual effect of some sort. Sometimes it's just done as a bit of an enhancement. So the DOTD has already decided to sort of increase the value of this project by including some things on and with the structure, including a signature bridge feature at Jefferson, pylon gateways, going with the segmental box. Those are all driven out of public involvement to improve the visual impact, to make it a more pleasant experience. The 20-foot clearance underneath it is a part of that, right? So there's already a commitment to do more than what could be done, right? To make this more than just any old project, because Lafayette is not just any old place. And everybody knows that. Secretary Wilson of the DOTD, he's from Lafayette, lives in Lafayette. Everybody involved wants to get this right. And that, at least to date, is where DOTD has put a lot of its emphasis is on those structural enhancements above and beyond what they'd have to do to just get the job done. There may be other enhancements that the Federal Highways and DOTD would entertain. There may be enhancements that would result from mitigating an impact. There may be enhancements that are funded locally. And so landscaping could be done in all of those different ways, right? So if there's 100 trees planted on the project, maybe some of those are DOTD, maybe some of those are city, maybe some of those are mitigating something, which would again be the DOTD. So we have only just now selected some basic tree concepts for the major trees. And a detailed landscaping plan is a ways away. There's no routine, there's no policy or regulation that just automatically lines a corridor with trees. That is something that has to come out of a process like this, has to be budgeted and afforded, right? Every parish in the state wants a project and everybody wants it beautiful, but there's only so much money. So I think I danced around your answer. There's nothing automatically that would line it in trees. It is possible that we could line it in trees in some way. In this particular case, it may be so tight that that is problematic. Again, in Freetown, there may be some places we could do a similar thing, but the right of way in some cases is so narrow, or it might have a drainage feature and confound our ability to put an array of trees there.
Hey, Robert actually has a follow-up question comment. So Robert, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, I'll let you ask it directly to Derek.
I did. I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes all that needs to be done or partly what needs to happen is to kind of get out of the way. There's already been a significant effort by Trees of Acadiana and the Freetown, Puerto Rico community to plant trees along the railroad. And if they were encouraged and engaged, maybe through a downtown organization in the city, then probably you could, kind of rally a significant amount of people, which would have a positive impact, I think, on the overall perception of the project. In other words, letting them put some color to what is all, an otherwise rather bland perspective from their homes, from their neighborhoods, and that vantage point. A tree can do a lot to buffer and helping them select trees and knowing exactly where they can plant and seeing how you can support their efforts and organize their efforts better, maybe even bringing some state resources to bear, I think would go a long way to, be a virtual handshake with these communities.
Robert, that is such fabulous input. I wish you'd offer that up in some of the other meetings we've had over the last few months, because that's exactly what we need. There are elements of this project that are going to require collaboration. For example, the understructure uses where it's elevated through the center of the city. If there's a park-like space, if there's parking and basketball courts and fun stuff under there, DOTD and FHWA will participate, but they can't do all of that for us, right? And so there's got to be local partners, and something like you'd mentioned with the trees, that's often where an NGO can come in and really make a big difference. I think we looked at their tree list, and we also looked at the Acadiana Native Plant Society list when we were developing our plant palette. And yeah, they're just fabulous partners, very knowledgeable. So that's a great idea and
Yeah.
very much a possibility.
Yeah, the Acadiana Native Plant Project is definitely another one who can help with like runoff from the freeways, where you
Yes.
have to divert water off of that into an area that can contain plants and these little, call them micro rain gardens, if you will, that can kind of trap and prevent some of the pollutants that'll, gather and build up on the freeway and then get washed out in a rain event. So that's just a few thoughts.
That's great. Thank you very much. And the issue of screening or providing some visual barrier is probably going to come up again. That was part of the conversation when we had impacts of Sterling Grove a long time ago. Trees can have an air quality benefit, and they have sort of a psychological noise benefit, but the standard noise methodologies don't really pick up on trees as helping much, but definitely with visual, they can make a big difference. So in this area and perhaps in Freetown, there's some places we could consider such. And this one doesn't take too long to cover because we've managed to stay a good ways further away from the Wallace Estate. And mind you, the Wallace Estate is a large district, but it doesn't really have contributing structures or contributing resources along its edge. I mean, the entire thing is still a district, and you try not to impinge upon the edge of a district even. But that being said, most of the resources are towards the center. We have stayed a good ways away from it. Now we have had to make some changes here with the Khalees Saloom interchange. It's a very complicated intersection, lots of movements, lots of traffic. Y'all know that. I saw it today during the storm. There was no time to be seeing that area when the rain was coming down as it was. So we're close, but entirely outside of what is the boundary, and the boundary here is not even where the heart of some of the structures and stuff are. We will have some conversations about how they'll access the road and how they'd be able to come and go and ride in, ride out options or whatever it might be. So that conversation is yet to be had, but we've managed to completely pull the project away from the estate. So our right of way and their right of way boundary do not cross. So I can go back and show some different images. If any of y'all from the respective communities want to take another look, I can stop long enough. You can do a screen capture, and then you don't even have to wait for the download. You can email it to your pals right away and show them and start a conversation. Do we have any conversation in the chat? Is there anything that anyone from our good SHPO or FHWA participants would like to share?
Unmute him.
Great.
When you were showing the adjusted right of way for the Johnston Street and the Rod, where those intersected around the downtown area, there was a series of yellow squares in the image. I was curious
Yes.
to know what those were.
That is because the boulevard, the Evangeline Boulevard, Evangeline Thruway Boulevard, well, the naming is not yet settled. That's running right through here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where substandard roads intersect with a DOTD FHWA project, we fix it all, right? Obviously, we're not here to fix all the streets in the city, but all the ones that interface, we fix it to the extent that, one, it doesn't get torn up right after we get done with our work. The lanes have to configure just right. The striping has to align just right. So there's usually lots of little changes. What y'all get out of that locally is lots of little improvements to lots of little streets, right? So sort of what we're saying here is that there's the throughway, and we'll have to fix some of these local streets in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe part of Chestnut back here, but we wouldn't just acquire the entire swath though. So there's the elevated, there's the boulevard, but in the middle are these private properties that would not be acquired, rather than just purchasing up the entire swath. These would remain unaffected.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm not trying to close it. So, you know, if you're still thinking of questions or if you have something to say, then we're here for you. But I just want to start, you know, segueing into the next time we talk, right? So in some cases, there's just not really much to talk about, right? There's not much to talk about down here. We're completely outside of the area. It's not going to really look any different for them or sound any different for them. If one of y'all still wants to assert that there's an adverse effect, we'll hear you out. Of course, this is conversational, and some of y'all know history that we don't know, and that sort of thing. So we do want to hear all sorts of perspectives here. But for example, we don't imagine that we would determine there is any adverse effect here. We would not offer mitigation to this property. We've done what we were supposed to do, which was the first thing. The rule from the National Historic Preservation Act and in NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, say avoid the impact first. If you can't, minimize it, and then if you can't, mitigate it. We avoided it, so we wouldn't have to mitigate it. Similarly, up there with Sterling Grove, I don't think there's a conversation to be had there either. We've managed to pull away from it. You saw from the renderings that it's not going to be a big visual presence for them. We're not penetrating the district in any kind of way. So we don't foresee there being a lot of conversation about Sterling Grove, other than the fact that there was a very different conversation with Sterling Grove a few years ago, and we just have to sort of rectify the two. Those old agreements have expired, and they were based on data that has changed, right? So we still want to have that conversation with the folks in Sterling Grove and talk that through with them so they don't feel like we've somehow changed the rules or moved the goalposts or something like that. We in fact moved the project instead. And then there's some places that we do think there's more of a conversation, and y'all can help us figure out what's going on. Trapeze, not so much. We are right on the line, right? And it may cause us to have to sacrifice things, right? Like what we'd like to do is full travel lanes, a good sidewalk, a safe shoulder, and a bike lane. But if we're 10 feet too wide, y'all can help us figure out what to drop, right? Maybe we combine the sidewalk and the bike lane into a path. Maybe the sidewalk isn't quite as big as we'd like it to be. Maybe it's only a 5-foot sidewalk and it's right on the curb or something like that. So in this case, I also don't think there's going to be an effect. We just want to work with y'all to figure out the best way to make sure that we don't have that effect. Because we also like to build the right sidewalks and shoulders and all that sort of thing. Because to depart from those standards takes some additional work and some process. Mm-hmm.
We've got a question from Anita.
Great.
She says, sound is one of the things that keeps coming up in my conversations with downtown stakeholders. I am interested to learn more about sound mitigation and hear from downtown's neighbors in Sterling Grove, Macomb Vise, and Freetown, Puerto Rico. And Anita, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can ask a follow-up question when Derek has answered this one.
Thanks, Jennifer. Derek, I know we've talked about this in some of our smaller group discussions with the, I forget what it's called these days, the community working group folks. And I think it's just something that keeps coming up in my just kind of daily conversations as people are learning that the connector discussions are picking back up and a lot of things are being decided, and we'll know a lot more in the next year on what design looks like. I know there was various conversations that happened in different neighborhood groups about the height of the interstate and how sound, is impacted by height. And, lighting kind of keeps coming up as well. So I really think that sound and lighting in this conversation about like what the modified alternatives are going to end up being at in relation to adjacent neighborhoods and an adjacent downtown district. And just a better understanding of kind of bringing these conversations together to provide more clarity to our stakeholders about what can be done, kind of similar to what Robert was talking about with using trees. Are there other things we could be discussing as sound mitigation measures? Is that something we need to be talking about with LCG and other NGOs, as you mentioned, to be able to go back to our stakeholders? I've encouraged everyone who has, had a concern brought to me about sound or about lighting to come to the open house next week. We will be pushing it out to all of our folks who are signed up for our emails. But, I just wanted to point that out because I think tying those pieces of feedback that I'm getting anecdotally to things I know we've talked about in the community groups to this conversation, now that we have better clarity about where we're going to see the most impacts by being adjacent to the actual roadway, is something I just don't want to lose sight of.
Thank you for that. And thank you for pushing the open house out to your folks so we can get more attendance. That'd be good. Noise and lighting are part of this conversation. We don't have all of those data for you at this point. And, other folks who are both on the advisory group and part of the 106 consulting parties have told us, don't ask us for an opinion before you show us everything, right? And, this is a tricky and lengthy process. You know it pretty well. And, if you advance the project really far and work it all out and then show people, they say, why didn't you talk to me earlier? Right? And if you just advance it in little increments and show them along the way, then you hear, well, I don't have all the data I need, right? And both are true, both are legitimate, right? That's part of the trickiness of doing this. So we are, in a sense, defining the project to go into the remaining environmental process, right? So the easy part of the environmental process is over. We know what the census tracts are. We know what the endangered species are. There aren't any. We know about the geotechnical conditions, et cetera, right? But we had to really get the alignment set, the height, like you said, set, work out the traffic, make sure the traffic was sort of settled to some extent before we could run the noise analysis, because the noise analysis relies on plan and profile data for the structure and the road, as well as lots of detailed traffic information, the mix of vehicles, the delay, the volume of vehicles, speed of the vehicles, all kinds of things like that. So that has now been started. All of those data have been pushed to the noise modelers who use a federal modeling system to tell what the noise impacts are. So where we are now is we've defined the project to a good enough extent that we can complete the other analyses. In 3-4 months, 5 months at the worst, we'll have outputs on noise walls, where there might or might not be noise impacts, where noise walls might or might not be warranted, what the impact would be like after the wall was put up, and those sorts of data. And we'll have these conversations again. And that can be it's obviously an effect in some way, right? You can hear a highway. I think I've told you in other sessions, I live about 5-6 blocks away from an elevated expressway. And according to the standards, I'm not adversely affected and it doesn't bother me. But yeah, if I go outside and listen real close, I can sort of hear it out there, right? There's quantifiable thresholds for when there is an impact. If we determine that there is a noise impact, and that noise impact is happening to properties in a historic district, then there's also a 106 conversation about whether or not those noise impacts need to be addressed in a special way because of the nature of the historic property. For example, you wouldn't want to force residential property owners to pull out their original wooden double hung windows and put in some double pane vinyl ones because of the noise impact, right? You'd be inadvertently causing a worsening effect of the whole thing, right? A lot of it gets down to the noise walls. It is very seldom that anything more than the wall is necessary, but we'll get there. There's also the design elements about the walls. What especially down there at Drain Street, if there were walls anywhere near there, what they should look like, how much that changes the view. And then similarly, we'll get there with lighting. I think we have to do a little bit more work with the LCG about the types and the amount of lighting on the elevated expressway. That being said, I think we can still probably start to address lighting in this process in an if-then kind of way, right? I can see the rendering. I can see where the highway is going to be, for example. If that had a wall on it, here's how I'd feel about it, noise wall. If that had lighting on it, here's how I would feel about it. And then as the data comes in, we can find. Yes. Lou is just clarifying here, if there is a noise impact, it's likely going to arise from the volume up here, because the majority of the traffic that is now going right through the neighborhoods on the thruway is going to be up here going past. And if there are walls, they would actually be, or barriers, they would actually be up there on the structure, making the structure look a little bit taller. But there's all kinds of tricky ways that noise moves around too. And there's different kinds of noise. There's the engine noise, there's the wheel noise. They have different frequencies. It's very interesting. Has a lot to do with physics. And so sometimes there's counterintuitive noise impacts or lack of impact you wouldn't think. So once we start modeling those and then model the noise barriers, if there are any, we'll have another set of things to talk about.
So we've had a few follow-up questions and comments from both Robert and Anita, and I'm going to ask them to both unmute their microphones and tell us their thoughts. Robert, can we start with you? Your first comment was that trees can have a profound impact on, especially if they're dense. And you've talked a little bit about the
Yes.
taller trees versus the lower ones. So I would like for you to follow up, and then if Anita, you want to follow up in response to Derek's comments, you can do that too.
I've done some research on this issue over the last few years, and there's no silver bullet, but what it amounts, the solutions that work are combinations of solutions. So it's not one thing, but it's 10 things. I just mentioned in the chat that the joints between the concrete sections, which tend to be kind of prefabricated long sections, that slope where they typically have a slight arch to them.
Yes.
And if you can have the leg supports a little bit closer than normal that go into the ground, then it reduces that arched belly, if you will, which makes the impact of the wheels hitting the intersection where the next section actually goes up. It reduces that significantly. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a little tool for the toolbox. The sides of the elevated roadway, what you would see that would, let's say the concrete side that would prevent you from driving off of it, can be taller, or a more cost-effective option is to have kind of an additional element that would sit on top of that concrete section that I don't know what the various options are. I mean, that would be a best practice thing that DOTD could glean from other cities and newer projects, probably, especially in maybe cities like Austin or Seattle or Boston or whatever. But one example that I see is the little green kind of reflectors that stick up in the middle of the two oncoming traffic lanes. I think it's mostly used for headlights to prevent the headlights of one vehicle from blinding someone else, being that they're in close proximity to each other. But something similar can help, and it just creates another layer, if you will, that begins to give you the combination of solutions working in a synergy fashion. The other thing that is more, I think, common is plant a tree, let the tree grow, and then it becomes a buffer. But it's not really a single tree that becomes the buffer, and I think that's where the studies would jibe with the real world. You have to create a kind of a tiered density of plantings, and so the noise, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a acoustic engineer, but the noise as it travels down is significantly less than out and up, and that's really the noise that you have to fight against. So if you have a tree, it's providing visual, air, noise mitigation as it gets to that height. And then the next layer would be a another type of tree. Also, all of these should be evergreen trees that keep their foliage year round. And then you take it down another notch, and you have, you know, kind of your street level trees, or maybe your slow growing trees and bushes. And so as that noise travels down towards and into the neighborhoods, it has to go through multiple layers of things, whether it's a man-made, you know, at the roadway, or a tree, a bush, or whatever. And it just filters out the noise as best you can. So that's my suggestions.
That's great. And bringing a lot to the table. I really appreciate that.
And Anita had a follow-up question. Anita, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can ask your follow-up question to Derek.
Derek, can you go back to one of the visuals of downtown that shows the rod and then the new? Thank you. So in looking at this, if we're looking at the red and how it used to be much more invasive into downtown, particularly when it comes to the Coburn site, a new development that was just completed last year at the edge of that triangle, which the map kind of falls off, but it's you know, where that red is sticking out the furthest. You know, I was thinking about something you said when it comes to sound mitigation and residential. It would be a good idea to talk to the Lafayette Public Trust Financing Authority, who now has control over the Coburn site, and I believe has the plans to purchase it from DOTD once it's officially released from the ROD. Because my understanding is that they want to look at some mixed use opportunities. Also, additionally, you know, with the ROD shifting and changing, I think there's going to be more opportunity for mixed use development on this side of downtown. I know that LPTFA's campus is right across 2nd Street from the official downtown district, and they are planning a 70-unit market rate apartment complex to add to their suite of properties in the downtown area. So, you know, when it comes to considering sound mitigation, now that we have freed up a lot more property for development downtown, by shifting the ROD and changing the way that the interstate is going to interact with downtown, you know, thinking about sound mitigation when it comes to future development opportunities, I think is going to be a really smart discussion for us to have. I know that when CGI was previously looking at various sites downtown, that was also something that they brought up, was the sound impacts of the future I-49 South, if they were looking at this side of downtown for an office location. So just, you know, you brought it up, and I think it was a really good point to consider with these shifts to the ROD and more land being opened up for development downtown. I think really trying to think forward about what the opportunities are in this part of downtown and how they could be impacted by the interstate and what we can do to mitigate is going to be a really important discussion to plan for the future.
Indeed so, Anita. I think I'm glad you're thinking down the line a good bit. You know, things are a little bit different on the downtown side in that you've got a lot more buildings, and so it's going to break up the noise some as well. And as we've mentioned, along the thruway, between the thruway and the interstate, if that development is as tall as the structure, it in and of itself is going to block a lot of the noise. So Lou, who's leading a lot of this work, he and I live kind of a similar distance away from the same highway, but in different neighborhoods. And he has a lot taller buildings and more trees in his neighborhood, and barely even hears it in the yard, can't even think about it. Whereas there's a lot of small houses, short ranch style houses in my neighborhood, so I hear more of it, right? So the downtown, as it develops, will, you know, wall itself off in a way from some of the noise it packs. And then the new buildings, of course, they come in with nice double pane, triple pane windows and a little bit more seal to them. You know, I can hear it in my house because my house is drafty and it's got single pane, ancient windows, and you know, so it gets in my building a lot more than it would get in a new building. But I think it's appropriate for the development community to think about the changes and how that would change how they'd approach it. And then, of course, it's something that that I know you and many members of the LCG staff will be working on, about how the corridor, what the development looks like along the corridor, right? And part of that is what's along the boulevard, and that's a bunch of small parcels that can be developed by small players or consolidated by a larger master plan project. And then part of that is the railroad property as well that moves through here, right? Which is not something the DOTD is going to purchase. The DOTD is going to purchase enough to build what it has to build and an adequate buffer along its side, but there's still remaining a significant strip of land. Now, it's not the most easily developable because it's difficult to access with the railroad and all that sort of thing. But y'all probably have been through plenty of Texas communities where people are building high-end mixed use and residential structures right along edge of the highways, right? It's that mobility is really there, and it has a lot of appeal, and that can change the noise in and of itself.
Okay. Robert had a very significant follow-up comment and another question for you. So I'll
Great.
go ahead and ask Robert to unmute, follow up with that.
I wanted to mention that speed has a dramatic impact on noise pollution, and it also has increases of reduced speed levels, increased safety concerns. Some people talk about the risk of a tanker truck going over the edge, and it's next to a neighborhood, and oh my God, that it's full of chlorine gas, and et cetera, et cetera. So having taller sides of the roadway, it helps mitigate that noise, visual safety concern. But the speed as they travel through the most sensitive area, a reduction from 65 or 70, say even to 50, would be a huge win for the communities along the roadway. And this is not, this is pretty typical in planning today, from what I know. But the other thing I wanted to say about the plantings is, the construction won't start for a while. And, as this process goes on and on and on, I think it would be helpful to acknowledge that the concerns of the communities along the roadways are not only limited to the final product. The construction itself, while it goes on, and the vehicles to a certain extent, will create a lot of dust and a lot of noise. And so planting trees and addressing the vegetation concerns as I described them, really, as soon as everything is kind of finalized, and just getting in there and prioritizing that, because trees take a while to grow. Interstates take a while to build. But if you can plant a tree today, you're sending a very strong message to a community that's concerned about doing everything possible to mitigate, these various concerns, air, visual, noise, and safety concerns. So just something for y'all to keep in mind. I think a lot of people would say, well, if we could do it, we just do it ourselves, and I think you'll have a lot of that mentality and that kind of go get them attitude, so I don't think DOTD should maintain a mindset that says we have to do it, ourselves, and where are we going to get the money. I think if you just talk about it and mention it and discuss it in the light that I'm, in the context that I'm providing, that it could be a very powerful symbolic tool. I think it could go a long way to be a build a bridge, between the communities and DOTD, and help, everybody kind of get along a little better.
Robert, you should be on the team. You are full of good ideas. I can touch on a couple of them. On the barrier issue, the DOTD has agreed to only do one standard barrier type on elevated structures, and it is a solid concrete barrier type, 42 inches tall, I think, maybe 44. So in the past, you've seen things that had maybe a half concrete and then a steel above it and had openings and things like that, which were just as safe, but the full solid concrete barrier that they've agreed upon is going to have a noise mitigating effect in of itself. That's something that the model even can tell the difference between that and some of the more conventional railings. So right on, you're completely right, and it's already sort of built in. In terms of the trees and the temporary effects, there will be temporary effects. The EIS will detail those out and can talk about things that can be done, low sulfur emission equipment, and making sure that there's certain hours of operation, and making sure construction lighting isn't in anybody's window. And we're a little ways away from that conversation, but that is a conversation that will be had. And as part of that, the landscaping is in there. The construction's going to be destructive in some places, right? Even if it takes you build an addition on your house, and what a disaster it makes of things, right? So it's messy, but with fencing and screening and dust controls and things like that, right? There's things that can be done. I've not heard of a landscaping put in ahead of time, but it's something that we can certainly look at in areas where we know we won't have an issue, where we won't need to park equipment or stack up bridge parts or something like that.
Exactly. And it may, by looking at it now, before you have your staging plan already kind of committed to, you may be able to shuffle the deck a little bit and just move things around, kind of like you did the revised rod, and say, oh, well, now that we're looking at it, we could totally move that over here. We have this parking lot or whatever. So I just, I cannot strongly state enough how much that would benefit the overall kind of public perception from my perspective. I mean, talk to people, ask them what they think. But the other thing is it's just kind of a practical thing is, if you finish the project and then you go and you plant a tree and you say, hey, see, we did this, it's going to mitigate stuff. And they're like, yeah, well, in 20 years.
Right. Yep.
So you need to find some level of mature tree, and you need to have some foresight and incorporate into your planning to say, look, the goal is when we're ready to put cars and trucks on this thing, that the trees have in the vegetation areas, all of the ones that you can plant ahead of time have reached some level of maturity. Okay. And because when they're young, they're going to help with the construction noise. And when they're old, they're going to help with the highway noise. The other point I wanted to make is that concrete side that you're talking about, which is way better, obviously, than the other options. There's a topper, and I think there's different types of toppers that can maybe go on top of that. And when you're designing the top of that, and you may need to consider bracketing and things of that nature that might interface things that could be bolted down onto the top of that arm, on either side of the highway structure. So just a little design detail that maybe we don't know what's going to go on it, but if we know that it would benefit the project and the community to add something, then you can start looking at those options and see what would work with the skeleton, the steel skeleton that is in that little side concrete.
That's great. Thank you. Especially like the when you mentioned the one that's done between the lanes to protect some of the glare a little bit. Great. Thank you. Anybody we haven't heard from tonight? Anyone have you want to ask a clarifying question about the process or about any of the figures you've seen?
Nothing in the chat,
Okay.
but if you want to ask questions, we certainly encourage you to make a comment in the chat or let us know what you think.
And we'll be back with you next week, right? We have 2 more of these discussions. So think about these, think about what you've seen. Walk the dog, think about where the highway will be and what that would look like from where you're standing and what that might sound like. And we'll come back to this conversation. Yes. Lou was just pointing out that we will be uploading these slides so that you can share them with folks. But we know that this is sort of a quick pace to things. We're trying to keep up a good pace. We don't want to still be planning this thing 20 years from now. So the idea is that we define this project, which includes the mitigation related to 106. We analyze the environmental effects through 2022 and get to, by the end of that, right at the beginning of 2023, we get our federal approval. And then we're off to the races with the completion of design and maybe even construction of some independent segments that could move ahead of others. So that's the course we're on. All of y'all participating is a big part of that.
Looks like Carrie Cox has a question for the group, but before we move to that, just wanted to let everybody know that next week, if you do plan to attend in person, the meeting will be held, the next meeting will be held on Monday, the 1st of November at the Science Museum, which is between Jefferson Street and Congress. And the following meeting will also be held at Jefferson Street on the 2nd. That's on the Tuesday. So if you do plan to join in person, that's where you can find us. If not, you have the Zoom link in your invitation. So we do hope to see you at one or both of those. And with that, I'll let Carrie ask a question that Derek can repeat for the group.
Thank you. Carrie was just asking if we should proceed and talk about, because we started talking about the areas where we thought there wasn't an issue, there won't be an effect. He's sort of begging the question, so then where are we talking about having an effect potentially, right? Well, not in Sterling Grove, not in the downtown. I think we've done a good job of pulling away from the district here. I think that, images such as that really make the point that, there's a lot of other things that are going to happen in that neighborhood that are going to have an effect much more than this project would, other than, of course, mobility and all that sort of thing, right? I'm talking about the adverse visual sorts of effects. I think here is where we've got a conversation about, is this an intrusion? We've managed to not acquire the parcels. We won't take any homes out. We won't be taking any historic structures out, right? So that's an accomplishment. That being said, we are pretty darn close, right? And so that is not a typical view from a historic district. It's on the edge of the historic district without a lot of contributing resources right there, but maybe there's some visual screening or something like that that would minimize the potential of this having an adverse effect on the district. All right, great. Noel's asking, so what's next? What's the objective of the next meeting? So we put information in front of you that you haven't seen yet. We've gone over these. We have some of our own perspectives. We want to really get deeper into the conversation about exactly what effects we all would agree are occurring, right? We want to hear from y'all. We want to hear from the neighbors. We want to make sure that we're aligned with SHPO staff and the local folks. So we want to have and we'll have these same graphics, but I'm not going to bother with an hour-long lecture. We're just going to dive right in. Is this an effect or is it not? If it is an effect, what can we do to maybe minimize it? Is it possible to avoid it without moving the whole highway, which is not a possibility, right? If not, are there mitigations that are necessary? Maybe it's just a row of trees and we're done, and that's all it's going to take. Maybe it's something else that we could do to sort of shore up the district edge with some signage or some other modest improvement or something of that sort. But that's what we want to get into. Are these effects? Does everyone think it's an effect? If so, what sort of thing would offset that or mitigate that effect if we have to mitigate it?
Robert chimes in with planning and zoning may want to consider allowing very short buildings in those areas too. 12-foot deep liner shops are used in some cities. Robert, you want to unmute and clarify that? We're getting some puzzled looks.
Yeah, you mentioned that the view is not typical of a historic district. I read just the other day about zoning in, I cannot think of the city, but they called them liner shops. And so in certain areas, you just don't have the depth or the demand for a big store or things of this nature. And so they created this option in specific areas to build out liner shops. And they're very, very, they were not deep, 12, 15 feet. But they would present to the district looking from the neighborhood, they would present as something much cuter, more attractive, more appropriate architectural vernacular. And they would also create another buffer. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it is a tactic that different districts will take, is to make new construction that is sympathetic to the district's historic time period, but are still new, right? But plenty of historic districts have new construction in them that's done very tastefully and can help to sort of shore up the edges of a property. And that, that can be a combination of different actions. Local government can be involved through adjudicated property. Habitat can build homes. Private individuals can build the homes. And that can do a lot to block views, obviously. And as we said earlier, it can block sound. And some of those things are not really in the toolbox of things that the DOTD is even allowed to do. I mean, the DOTD has a lot of creative people, but they're still bound in by certain parameters, of course. And building houses is not part of their mission exactly, but certainly coordinating and having these conversations and like you had said, making sure that the local entities, NGOs, governmental and other are working together with the understanding of what the project is and where it's going to be and exactly what it's going to look like, so everyone can start sort of moving in the same direction. Lou is asking if there is anyone from the Freetown neighborhood on the telephone. I almost asked that earlier. Is anybody on the call tonight? If so, we'd like to hear from you about this issue. You can hold your powder till next Monday if you wish, but we definitely want to make sure that we have some representation from each of the areas.
If you are from Freetown, go ahead and unmute yourself and or raise your hand. Doesn't look like we've got anybody.
Well, it's just one meeting tonight. Hopefully some of those folks, because we did make sure that we had good representation when we set up the group to begin with. Maybe what we'll do is double back around with some of the folks that we know would be able to speak from this neighborhood, so to speak, and see if they're going to be able to join us next Tuesday or Monday and Tuesday. That being said, we've got a team here next week that will be available to meet with folks, and most all of us are in Louisiana anyways. Some of us Baton Rouge, some of us Lafayette, some of us New Orleans, but if someone misses a key meeting, but we really want that input, and we definitely want it from folks who can sort of speak for this neighborhood to some extent, we'll go out of our way. We'll come to you. We'll set a new time and place. We want this conversation to be inclusive, certainly. Thank you for that, Lou. So we'll check our list and see who we can encourage to come next week. Otherwise, I think we're at the end of the night. Thanks so much. Let's have a robust conversation Monday evening. We'll see you then.